Hello, everyone. This is Bill Kenny, and I want to welcome you to the webinar on Criteria Conundrum. We really are excited that you're with us today and look forward to providing this content for you. Just one procedural thought as we get going is you may or we may experience better sound quality if you're not talking. If you wouldn't mind putting your phone on mute, that would be a really neat thing. We will have time at the end, certainly, to have any type of two-way dialogue we want to have, and certainly in our office hours after the call as well. We'd be more than glad to have open dialogue, but it will help our sound quality, at least during the webinar, to have phones on mute. So, again, welcome, and we're excited to help you with your criteria. The goal of this event really is to help you fulfill your objectives. So we have incorporated in questions that were posed to us as well, and we want to make sure that, again, at the end that we respond to any additional questions as well. So let's hop right into our content. And just so you know a little bit about me, my name is Bill Kenny, and I'm the founder of a company called Test My Pitch. In building our company, I go to about 100 or more pitch events a year, and our team goes to somewhere upwards of 200 pitch events a year. So we get a really good view on what's going on at pitch events, what are some of the things that are working well, what are some of the challenges. One of the disclaimers I guess I'd share is that somebody just joined the call. Putting phone on mute. Whoever just joined the call, if you could put your phone on mute, that would be great. Oh, sounds like we're on mute. Super, thank you. Well, we're excited you're with us, but it does help our sound quality if phones are on mute. So I was just introducing. I'm going to hold, if you wouldn't mind putting your phone on mute. It sounds like somebody's got a little bit of background on. So maybe they're going to rejoin us. So in any event, the disclaimer that I wanted to share is that we're all going to come at this from different directions. We certainly suggest that you have as much understanding that what we're going to share are things that we observe, and we certainly encourage you to have your own observations and develop systems that fit well with your objectives. And so we'll share our observations, and hopefully they match with what you're seeing as well. So hopping in to some of the questions we received, and this is sort of a summary of the questions, and we'll address these, or aim to address these at the end. So, how do we have consistent metrics? How do we deal with judges that apply their own criteria, even though we provide written or oral instruction? How do we have clear, fair, and effective criteria for the participants and instruction that matches for both the pitchers beforehand and the judges? If I could ask, there's still someone, it appears, that may not have their phone on mute. We are getting some feedback on the line, so if you have recently joined and don't have your phone on mute, that will definitely help us out. So here's our agenda. We're going to talk about the common challenges with judging. We're going to talk about some remedies, developing the best criteria, the best rubric, and how to select and orient judges. And we'll also share with you a criteria development worksheet that we've built, and certainly would be more than glad to send to any of you, and hope that you find good value in it. We'll then address questions, and hopefully you've all received a note that said that we're going to be doing office hours after this call, and essentially all that means is we're going to be staying on the line for anyone that would like to talk about their specific situation and either challenges that they see in developing their criteria, or we'll actually go through and develop criteria right on the line. So more than glad to sort of walk through any scenarios, and certainly, for as long as folks want, we're more than happy to dive into being very specific about criteria recommendations in certain circumstances. So let's just hop in, and when we think about developing criteria, for us the real key with anything like this is to start at the outcome that we have in mind. And so as we think about different types of pitch events, different types of idea presentations, and so on, they really boil down just to three purposes, and you may add others, but these are the three that we see. The first is, often these are engagement events. The goal is to get either students or would-be entrepreneurs or even team members in organizations or corporations off the bench and into the game, and to give them an experience and to encourage them to come back. So that whole idea of engagement. The second type is to educate. So once people are off the bench and engaged, then we want to help them move from whatever level of understanding they currently have to some more sophisticated level, some more productive level of understanding through a process. It could be through an accelerator or an incubator or a variety of different types of programs that will help them improve their understanding and in fact, results. And then the third type of pitch event is a funding event. And, less than 1% of the startups or businesses in the country actually ever get funding. So it is definitely a smaller set of the events are funding related, but they're still there, and obviously they're an important part because often those are the scalable ventures that many organizations are aiming at. So another way to represent these different stages are to look at them as a funnel. So the engagement stage are really about getting, sort of filling the top of the funnel with those would-be participants and getting them, goal being to get them into the education phase, and then possibly, if it makes sense, to the funding phase. And maybe another way to look at these three stages is actually to change the last fund from funding to performance or perform. And then it applies really to all use cases. So perform, a subset of that may be funding, but it also may be, launch. It may be getting out and beginning to acquire customers and so on, which is the best kind of fundraising. So these stages we're going to come back to, but ultimately understanding this and relating your criteria to the appropriate stage is a key part, and where quite often organizations are challenged. So as a good segue into some of the challenges is exactly what we were just talking about, the potential misalignment of criteria. And this can happen in many different ways. It can happen by having situations like we just talked about, where the organizations are looking at possibly funding level criteria for, sort of first time individuals who are just getting involved in sharing their ideas and their notions, and the idea that you're going to give a sort of funding type evaluation of a nascent idea is potentially very discouraging for the people getting evaluated, and in fact not very informative, because they're not ready for that, and it's almost like going to a gym. And you think about how the personal trainer works with an individual is they help them first focus on what they're doing, how they're lifting the weight, not necessarily about the weight itself, but it's the technique and the process as opposed to the actual quantity of weight and the amount of muscle mass they're building. It's really how do we keep them from hurting themselves, and how do we make sure that they come back tomorrow is really the early stage goals. So misaligned criteria, and maybe another way to look at this is, and it's actually interesting to see what can happen if the criteria are misaligned, because quite often the individuals who are coming into pitch, be they students or entrepreneurs or staff, will have one expectation when they walk in terms of how they're going to be evaluated. Let's just say they think they're going to be taking a chemistry exam, in terms of the evaluation, but yet how they actually are evaluated much more relates to a biology exam. So the feedback they're going to get won't relate at all to the expectation that they had, and so they're going to be very confused by that, and that alignment really informs their future actions, and that can be very, very important. So there are organizations that do a heck of a job, and I'd say many do, in creating really good criteria, but they lack judge and venture orientation or sufficient judge and venture orientation to make sure that those both that the criteria are implemented as intended, and also that the feedback is taken as intended. And so we'll definitely get into more about that. And then for execution, there are organizations that do an awesome job at creating good criteria. They do a good job at orienting, and then probably more pitch events that we see, the judges will get together after they've judged to actually determine winners. And so this is one area where the execution wheels can fall off. So they've used whatever rubric is given, and they're applying that well, and then they get in the room, and they, for whatever reason, they sort of totally go off script and make decisions about sort of the rank order or who won based on the charisma of the loudest person in the room, or the most influential judge, whatever the case might be. And giving an example, there are certainly many events where part of the judging is determining who might win some prize, often nominal, $1,000 to maybe $10,000 or even more. And the judges will have this great criteria, and they'll have done all the appropriate voting, and then they'll get in the room, and their discussion will be much more about who deserves the money the most, or who could use the money the most, when that wasn't anywhere on any of the scripts or any of the orientation or any of the criteria that they had. And so ultimately execution needs to be aligned with desired outcomes. And we do talk to many organizers after pitch events, and we'll go up to them, and the simple question is, how do these results, how do these rankings, or do the winners reflect what you expected? And so often when we see these gaps, the answer is they don't represent what the organizers expected. And in fact, quite often they're disappointed with what their judges came up with. And my guess is some folks on the phone and on this webinar have had this experience, and this is probably some of what is driving you to be with us today. And so, that sort of implementation and execution is key. So one of the things that we may come back to this comment, but seems to be appropriate in many places within the idea of judging pitches, because there are organizations that are reticent to share feedback. There are organizations that are resistant to judge a demo day because they're concerned about how the ventures will react to feedback. And our viewpoint is this is a huge disservice to the ventures, because feedback is something they need to learn to live with. They're going to get feedback from customers. They're going to get feedback from their employees. They're going to get feedback from investors. They're going to get feedback from their vendors. And it's not about protecting them from feedback. It's teaching them how to learn how to take in feedback, how to benefit from it. And so, again, quite often, and I say quite often, certainly in some cases, we see organizations resisting creating systems that ultimately capture and share feedback because it's not perfect. I don't, we love our customers and we love our vendors and so on. But the idea that we need to wait until their comments are perfect in order to listen to them and learn from them is unrealistic. And so we should much more learn how to interpret. And it's not a perfect process, but the more we exercise that muscle, the better we're going to get at it, the better we're going to ask follow-up questions and so on. And again, this is something you'll see repeated as we go through this. So remedies for any system. So if we look at the stages, we have sort of engage, educate, and perform, subset, fund. And so when we look at that, really the majority of the effort here is about how do we get people engaged and help them learn. In the end, there's going to be some interest in making some decisions about support, but so much of the pipeline and so much of the time in each stage is really about engagement and education, that having a way to give actionable feedback in a sort of loop system, much like sort of lean startup methodology, so that the ventures, the entrepreneurs, the students, and so on, that they can learn through progressive feedback. And that, again, when we started our conversation, this idea of having criteria that create reliable results, so that this is all congruent with the outcomes that we want, really become important. And that's why these stages become important, because they inform what type of criteria we should have. We don't want to apply a funding criteria to an engagement event, because ultimately the assessment and the feedback and the results won't resemble the outcome that we want. So when we develop our best rubric, the idea is really to bring all of this into focus. We want to be able to see very clearly. So I thought it might be helpful just to give an example of criteria, some examples of criteria that we see. So this is actual criteria from a customer who runs a statewide business plan competition. And you'll see that there are 8 criteria across the top of this grid: product, competition, market, demand, sales, model, team, and funding. And the criteria groups into 2 categories: business model and business plan. And so this was actually used 2 years ago to evaluate 3-minute pitches from students who had already submitted business plans. And the second stage of this competition was to evaluate these 3-minute pitches. And so this organization, as I recall, actually started with 12 criteria, and we talked them down to 8, which still is exceptionally daunting. So what the challenge that this creates with so many criteria is that, there really are 2 challenges. One is just logistically, it's very difficult to judge for judges in a 3-minute pitch, and there was probably a 2 or 3 minute Q&A session. It's really difficult for judges to give that many data points on a 3-minute pitch and a 2 or 3 minute Q&A. That's just it's a lot of different criteria for them to evaluate, and you end up sort of racing through it as opposed to sort of giving good thought to each. So it may be just a tweak on the high side in terms of the quantity, and the other is that it's, again, thinking about these are college students. These are probably more on the nascent side than the experienced side in terms of college students. And so there are a lot of sort of criteria here that relate to the sort of the viability of the business, which is great, but certainly the funding question and as opposed to talking about traction, do they have any customers? I think there are kind of some interesting things that can be done here that could help learning considerably. But number one, the volume of criteria, and then also the focus of the criteria is less aimed at that audience in terms of their education. And the other piece here is that these students had already gotten feedback on their business plan, which by and large was probably fairly aligned with these criteria. And again, in a 3-minute pitch, having this many things that you want them to talk about makes it really difficult. They end up just sort of jumping from topic to topic to try to satisfy the need. And it's not, ultimately they're not telling a story. They're just rattling off, whatever they can to sort of satisfy the criteria that are laid out. And ultimately, I think getting those individuals comfortable with telling a story and is really key. And again, that could be a story about their vision. It could be a story about why they should be funded. It could be a lot of different stories. But to take the audience on a journey would be a lot more valuable and in fact, say a lot more about the team and the venture. So if we take our little reverse pyramid here and engage, educate, and fund or perform, and we apply the type of criteria that we would want at each stage, what you really end up with, looking on the right-hand side, is early in this process, when we're just getting our cohorts engaged, is we want to focus on form. We want to focus on their delivery, their style, and less on the substance or content. And as they mature, as they go through the educate state and towards the perform and into the perform and fun stage, then it's a lot more about substance. And so, you might be 75% form and 25% substance early on, and you probably are closer to 90% substance and 10% or so form at the very bottom of the pyramid. But ultimately, no matter what, you're still evaluating people on their believability, their delivery. Even if it's not a criteria, it's still a part of how are they believable is a huge issue in terms of content delivery. So, and again, it's just sort of thinking about what do we have as a goal for this particular event or cohort or whatnot, and then at what stage are they, or should they be at for this, and then applying criteria that evaluate appropriately, balancing between form and substance, again, depending on where they are in this stage representation. So when we think about feedback, and you'll see or you saw the sort of judges ballot we showed earlier, and we'll show another one in a little bit, but you really want to have, the greatest type of learning, and this goes to criteria, is it's important to have both qualitative and quantitative feedback. And so if we analogize the learning opportunity as similar to driving a vehicle, with the vehicle we have two general types of feedback with driving. And one is looking out the windows, or the windshield, the side windows, the rear view mirrors, and so on, and that gives us quite a bit of qualitative information. It's all, it's based on what we see, and that tells us quite a bit about the impending dangers. It tells us about how we need to operate our vehicle in the road ahead, and any particular challenges that we may face. And there's also the other part of input we get is from the dashboard. And so this gives us a lot of quantitative information, everything from our speed, fuel, temperature, tachometer, and our odometer, and so on. And it would be impossible to successfully operate our motor vehicle for very long if we took away one of these two inputs or even both of these inputs. And so, the idea that, we're just going to give people quantitative feedback in the absence of qualitative feedback, then it's challenging, just as it would be if we were going to only share the qualitative feedback and not the quantitative feedback. Each of those types of feedback qualifies the other. In fact, if you think about the way most feedback happens today, in most, be it mentor or pitch type situations, the feedback that individuals receive 90+% of the time is oral. And oral feedback is great. It's a good start. But the challenge is understanding when you receive oral comments from someone, how to relate them with each other, how to relate them to the success of your venture based on, sort of known criteria. And then if you get input from two different sources, two mentors or two judges, then it actually exacerbates that problem, because I don't know how to relate the comments that one individual makes versus another versus ultimately how I'm evaluated. And having those oral comments qualified by quantitative scores really helps an individual understand and contextualize that information. And so that's really the goal here, is that we give, when you think about developing good criteria, it's not just about, how do we score people, but how do we give them feedback so that the next time they come, they're much more likely to succeed, or maybe they don't even come back. They're off and doing whatever they're doing. But the goal is to give them as much of an experience like we get when we're driving our car. We have all these wonderful inputs that give us as great a visibility as possible. And, gauges can misread. We can be deceived by what we see through our windshield, but they're inputs, and they're inputs that we can react to and respond to and learn from. And the more we have them and the more we have these inputs over time, the more we're able to learn how to use and adjust to them and benefit from them. So going back to a different ballot, and this is actually the exact same organization and what they used for criteria for the most recent version of their statewide business plan competition. So they started at 12 criteria, then they had 8 criteria. Now they're down to 5 criteria. And so they have problem, solution, market, finance, and team, all in one general category. And we could, this is actually, we actually suggested 4, I believe, and they came back and added one, but significantly better, significantly easier on the judges. And what ends up happening when you sort of manage the number of criteria to a sort of a more reasonable and actionable level is you end up getting a lot more text comments. And again, that it's just like looking out the window of the car. You need to put these both in balance. If we only had gauges in front of us, then it's going to be very difficult for us to have time to look out the window to take in those inputs. And likewise, if all we had was the window, we'd have no relative sense in terms of direction and speed and all those kinds of good inputs. So it's important that these be in balance. And again, for a 3-minute pitch, 5 criteria is really, in what we're learning, it's really at the top end in terms of how many criteria you have if you're going to allow, or if you're going to want to have text comments as well, because that's ultimately, it's, again, a balance in terms of how to do this. So this gives you a good idea of maybe the evolution that you can go through in terms of developing criteria, but they're now much, much more aligned. You don't see funding on here, and they're much more aligned with sort of, earlier stage college student type cohort. So let's hop into selecting and orienting judges, and it's always interesting as we talk to organizations who are going through this process, and there are obviously a lot of influences in terms of who should be a judge and how do we select them, and there may be some obligations organizationally to having people judge. So the usual suspects are the individuals who are investors in the community or sponsors of the organization or the event, certainly faculty and experienced or seasoned entrepreneurs, organizational or community mentors. The list goes on, and these are all really good choices. There's not a bad one here, and the real goal is to get them to sort of orient to how their feedback should be focused and who they're going to be evaluating. That's where we find that judges are most challenged is, the judges understand criteria. That's not a problem. They can read them. They can apply them. The issue is that more often than not, they don't know the context of the criteria. So if we go back to, actually we'll go back to this scoring sheet, and if we had everybody on the call sort of describe how to apply these 5 criteria, what we would find out is that each individual, we'd end up with as many contexts to this criteria as we have people. And so it's important that the organizer very, very succinctly describe the context of the criteria. In other words, what are the goals? Our goals are, simply to identify who communicated the best, who shared their idea in the most clear and cogent way, and maybe compelling, and now all the way to which one of these is most scalable and fundable. But if they know, if the judges can have that true north, that will tell them how to apply the criteria and be much more directional than sort of here are the criteria, sort of apply them. So when we look at sort of the evolution of feedback, there are really a few things we look at, and no presentation would be complete without a good X and Y axis chart. So when we look at this, you're really looking at, the idea of positive feedback versus direct feedback. In other words, the positive feedback being more encouraging, less about the substance and more about the form. Direct being, we need you to adjust in these ways in order to get to this next step or in order to succeed, and that we're not going to put flowery words in. If we don't mention it, you're doing fine there. If we do mention it, these are areas you need to adjust. And that's usually what you think of as direct, and often what many organizations, where they get challenges when there are judges that are too direct to an audience that they think should be earlier in the continuum. So the other axis, the y-axis, is dealing with a cohort or individuals who are more on the novice end of the scale versus those that are experts. So as our line goes up from novice to expert, then we go from being positive and reinforcing and encouraging to being direct. And so early in the process, what we're trying to do is get individual commitment. We want them, or team commitment, whatever that sort of entity is, or individual, and we want them to come on board. We want them to come to the second event. We want them to engage and enroll. And later, it's really about improvement. How do we get these individuals to move from where they are to an advanced level, whatever that means? And so, again, this is all really important, and it's important for the judges to know, what their role is and what the goal of this event. If it's a demo day, and they're just, they just finished the 12-week or 16-week accelerator, and this is really about celebration, then that's different than if, we're trying to evaluate who won and who should get funding, and or who should win the prize. And again, understanding that context is really, really important. And we can't, we sort of can't fault people for misapplying them if, they're kind of coming in from their own paradigm, which we hope and expect them to do. And it takes our qualifying to help them understand how to implement these things. So it's interesting. There's a lot of interest, and there's certainly a lot of questions around how do we how do we orient the judges appropriately? And where we find, in general, there is a fair amount of judge orientation that goes on. There could be more, and it could be better, as we just described. But where we see actually the biggest opportunity is in the receiver side. So for those who are getting feedback and or being judged, helping them understand what the opportunity in front of them is and how to best use and leverage it is probably the biggest opportunity. And so we've all certainly been in situations where we give feedback or we've seen feedback given and it's not well received. We may have even been in a situation where we've received feedback and not received it well, and certainly I'm right in that pool. And so that it's really understanding that that the evaluation being done is being done on the 3 minutes they just saw. It's not on you as a person. It's not on sort of your whole venture. It's what they saw from sort of what was communicated, what they heard, maybe not even what was said, but what they heard from what was just communicated and how they responded to it. And so it's understanding that context, and then a variety of other things that help the receiver respond to this judging process and utilize this information much better. So here's maybe hopefully a little bit of a paradigm shift. So our viewpoint is that all feedback is perfect, and I hear the arguments already, and I understand them, or at least think I understand them. And so the point of view isn't, that it's not that all feedback is correct, but it's perfect. In other words, it's correct from that person's point of view. It's exactly what they think. And so if we discourage people from saying exactly what they think, maybe we're going to tone it down if we're early stage and amp it up if we're late stage. But if we filter it, then we're really creating a situation where our customer, the venture or the student, isn't learning how to interpret and use feedback, because there will be many, 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 many days when they leave customer locations or they get off the phone with a vendor or they come out of a meeting with an employee where they don't understand the feedback they're getting, where it doesn't align with their worldview. And the ability to both invite and understand and be interested in feedback is by far the biggest muscle we see missing in entrepreneurs. And it's funny, if you were in art school or a creative school, feedback, critiquing is a very normal part of their existence. It happens in every class. It happens in every way, and in fact, they invite it. When you talk to artists, they want to know what you think, how you react to their work, and that curiosity is what helps them evolve very quickly. And so it's really not about a judge being perfect. It's about the ability to internalize that which is being said in a way that helps move the venture forward. Or that they filter it out, that it's coming from a place that, that is not complete, and maybe the pitch didn't well represent the idea, so the feedback can't represent, sort of that person's point of view on what reality is. So it's difficult to say that feedback isn't perfect because it's somebody's point of view, and if we don't invite people's point of view, then we're not going to learn very much. All we'll have is our sort of own sort of myopic point of view. So when we look at venture orientation or student or individual orientation, we're really talking about a few different things. So them understanding what the objective of the event is and the criteria are certainly paramount, so that having that context with the criteria is key, because that will tell them how to prepare. It'll tell them that they're going into a biology test and they need to know biology, and they need to show that they know biology. That's simple, but only done probably about 25 to 50% of the time. They need to understand how to listen. More often than not in Q&A sessions or in any type of feedback session, there's a tendency, if there are 10 ventures, that 3 or 4 of them will get defensive about their idea or talk much more than they listen. The thing that of 100 pitches, I don't know that I've seen even one of 100. It may be two of 100, or I'm sorry, one of 200 or one of 300 pitches, where I actually see a team or an individual prepared to take notes when they're getting questions or getting feedback. And so whether it's the individual who gave the pitch or a team member taking notes, that is exceptionally valuable. And and every once in a while I see an organization that takes notes for the venture. I would absolutely not recommend that. We want to teach the individuals to take their own notes, because they, number one, need to be able to read them, and number two, they need to learn that note-taking is important. And when if we sort of take this to the sort of the end of the scale, when 30 to 70% of an investor's decision as to whether to invest in a business or not has to do with the team and their reliability, their credibility, and so on. And if they're not smart enough to take notes, and it's not obvious that they're taking notes, it's being trustworthy it's a lot less about what you say than it's about what people observe you doing. And so, and it's not that you're putting on a show, but every pitch is a performance. And learning how to take notes, and to a certain degree, being seen to take notes is a good thing. But taking notes is the most important, whether you're seen or not. And again, it's the way to get that information. In terms of the ventures need to learn how to respond. Do they respond directly? Do they respond differently to certain types of questions? Do they ask a question to qualify what someone means before they respond? There are a lot of different techniques in here, but again, all of this has to do with what they're going to learn in this time period, and the more they talk, the less feedback they're going to get and less questions, which is a danger. So it's how do you respond to those questions in a way that maximizes the interaction that you have. And how to use digest, and action feedback. Another key part of this is sort of what do you do afterwards in terms of using and adjusting to this feedback. And then is there follow-up? Are there, whether it's judges or mentors or whatnot, are there touchbacks that you want to or should do with these individuals? And again, somewhat situational, and it's certainly going to depend on the event and organization. But understanding sort of venture orientation is a key part, and there are so many tools now that allow both judge and venture orientation to happen easily, and it may even be audience orientation. Maybe there may be other communities here that need to be oriented before, during, and after events. But whether it's doing webinars, whether it's creating handouts, whether it's creating a video, or having a pre-event or post-event meeting. There are lots of different tools, and again, it's just about sort of what fits any specific circumstance. But the key is really that you think of how do we get in the end, if it's about helping these students or ventures succeed, then ultimately it's how do we help them utilize what they already have, what's already being presented to them. And that all that feedback represents potential energy. And the more that they get, and the more they know how to read those comments in a way that is instructive, the more they're going to be able to action them successfully and come back more prepared. And even people that come back after them ideally will learn from sort of the opportunities that the others have had. Maybe feedback can be democratized, and so people can learn quite a bit from all that. So I'm going to switch off of my speakerphone for this because they're mowing in my neighborhood. So The next topic we want to get into is our criteria development worksheet, and this is something that, again, we're happy to share. We'll email out to everybody on the call, and happy to walk through it with anybody, but we'll do a sort of a quick walkthrough here. So the whole goal of this is really to help any organization that's developing criteria to do it in a way that that helps create a situation where the criteria are aligned with the objective. So, there are, I think, a variety of questions up front here that sort of begin the process. Everything from what are the pitch lengths, or what is the length of pitch? Are there slides or visuals being used? What's the purpose? Scalability and fundability, sustainability, and so on. And then, looking at the most critical elements that align with this primary purpose. What are the key things? Do they need to have validated that there's a problem, or validated that the solution is appropriate and the best one, that there's a substantial market, and so on. And as you flow through this, there are a variety of guides, like the number of criteria per minute of pitch. Again, these are just guidelines. It would be very easy to argue that any situation is unique, and it quite possibly could be. Again, it's a balance when we think of the number of criteria between having that qualitative feedback or quantitative feedback and whatever type of text qualitative feedback that would be available as well. And it's really the balance between those two that makes the judging process and the feedback most valuable. And ultimately, the whole goal as we flow through this is to get this down to specific criteria that we kind of like one-word criteria, both because it's very instructive and specific, and it also actually happens to fit in our tool very well, and it represents well on the judge's ballot. And then having a description that can be sort of giving definition to that specific term. And so it's really all about how do we create these criteria in a way, again, that empowers the judges to create results that are evaluating exactly what we want to be evaluated. And actually, just skipping back, I'm just going to skip back up to the number 3 here, the primary purpose. That ends up being the context of the event or of the criteria. So when the orientation for the judges is happening and for the benchers or students, then they should know how, ultimately they're going to be evaluated. They're going to be evaluated on their communication skills or on the sustainability of their business or fundability or whatnot. And these are the criteria that will help inform that evaluation. And the other, maybe another sort of student or venture orientation point is, if, for example, the format of the event is that judges will meet to caucus and discuss the pitches after having judged, the students knowing and ventures knowing that there's no criteria, as good as criteria can be, and we'll get to better and better criteria over time, but as good as they can be, they're never perfect, and they can never perfectly anticipate a cohort of pitches, because you can have a wide variety of types of ventures, but they're good. And again, the idea of perfect being the enemy of the good, the point isn't that, if we waited for perfect, we'd never do anything. So the goal here is we don't have, our speedometers aren't perfect. If we went out and calibrated them, we'd find out that they're not right. If we looked at our fuel gauge, it's probably not exactly right. But we learn as drivers over time how to adjust for that and how to sort of accommodate those imperfections. And so it's really all part of this is to begin learning, again, with more feedback, how to adjust what we do based on those imperfections. And so the venture's understanding that the judges may, they're going to score everybody, and we're happy to share the scores and the feedback and all that. The judges may determine, based on this goal, to slightly adjust the results they come to numerically because of the ultimate goal of this and the ability, sort of this particular venture, while it scored a little bit below this venture, has a much larger market or a much, sort of faster or quicker market opportunity that, again, just wasn't anticipated by the criteria, but we're going to nudge them up just a little bit because of that, sort of unique exception. What we're finding is that there's a lot less of that when a good sort of scoring system and good criteria are used, but still understanding that that can happen and it's all a part of this. And again, the goal ultimately is to give you, the students or the ventures, good feedback. And so we want to be upfront that, there may be slight adjustments as we judge or go forward, but understand our ultimate goal here is to help give you information to improve. And that's, that kind of integrity is key. And we do a lot of interviewing of successful entrepreneurs, people who have, sort of had great exits, and when we ask them, when you were building your company or when you were just getting started, what do you wish you had? What did you wish you would have had more of? Sort of what was missing that would have been helpful as you were developing? And of course, more often than not, we're expecting to hear money. We could have used a lot more money, because that's certainly what the marketplace is selling, is that there's a shortage of capital. And actually, a vast majority of the time, well over 75%, what we hear is feedback, that these entrepreneurs, even these rising stars, these bright stars, for as much attention as they get, the one thing that they really want and could use more of and value is feedback. And so the opportunity is in front of all of us to do that. So let's hop into, so we already kind of finished up the criteria development worksheet, and let's hop into the three questions, or three sort of summary questions that were posed here, and I'll pop through these. So how do we have consistent metrics? And I think, when you look at consistent metrics, it's, I think really about starting with the outcomes that we want to have, and following that process, and understanding what stage be it students or ventures or whatnot are at, and so that the metrics and the criteria align with those, both that stage and the outcomes that we're aiming at. So it's somewhat of a matrix that, we're sort of conceptualizing there. But again, the goal is really to make sure that we're aligned with those things, and then from there, really just using those in every evaluation of that cohort, so that they get used to it, they get used to the communication, the judges and mentors, and sort of everybody gets used to that. Or maybe in some cases you're just evaluating subsets of a larger sort of bed of criteria that might be used sort of at the end or at different waypoints, so that you're getting benchmarks as the venture progresses. But you may, in certain parts of a curriculum or a cohort, be focused on subsets of an overall criteria. There's certainly a lot of different ways to do this. Going on to the second question, how do we deal with judges that apply their own criteria, even though we provide written or oral instructions? Well, a firing squad's probably not a great idea. I think there might be some liability issues with that. But so, I guess the best suggestion that I can offer on that is giving context. So making sure that the criteria, it's not just criteria that are presented, but making sure that the context of those criteria or the outcome that's desired is described. So these are early stage students or entrepreneurs. We want to make sure we encourage them, as opposed to focusing on scalability. Tonight we're just focusing on how well they relate their idea to us, not even if it's a good idea, but do we understand it? And so that, and the criteria should reflect that, context, but making sure that the judges know that is key. And then if there is a deliberation, having it could be really any one of these personas could do it. Either having a head judge that keeps people on track to the outcomes that are sought, or having a facilitator of the judges meeting, which may be easier for all the judges, but again, it depends on the organization. But having someone internal who can act as a facilitator for that meeting, again, to keep the judges on track and to move things through, and to make sure that they're consistent and aligned with both the context and the criteria as they make determinations. Never a bad idea to have a referee. And again, a head judge can certainly do that. I've seen that work really well, or having a facilitator. And then the third question: how do we have clear, fair, effective criteria for the particular event and instructions that matches for both the pitchers beforehand and the judges? Yeah, I think these actually. This kind of relates to the previous two, at least as I read it, and that it's really about how are the number one is determining the criteria and the context well in advance so they can be communicated and people can prepare, particularly the ventures or students. And the judges don't need as much of a lead time because they're really just coming in that day and doing whatever evaluation. But and then whatever type of programming, it really depends on the event. We were involved, our systems were used at the largest pitch event I've ever heard of before this year. There were actually 180 ventures pitching in 21 concurrent rooms, so 21 pitches going on at a time in front of about 160 judges. This all happened in a 4 or 5 hour evening this past fall, and it was amazing. It was really, really amazing. But you think about how, taking this question and sort of applying it to such a huge event. And we helped this organization do a couple of webinars before, so that the judges were oriented and that they understood the criteria and they understood how they'd be judging and so on. And we did similar types of webinars for the ventures as well, so we could answer their questions and made sure that they knew how they were going to be judged. And I think ultimately it's what how do you propagate information to the audience that you're attracting? It may be convenient to have events. It may be they may respond better to emails or videos or whatever. It's just determining the mode that they'll respond to. And one of the benefits of doing it via webinar is a lot of the stuff is recordable, so the people that can't make it can watch it later, and it it can be archived. But there are a lot of ways to do these types of things so that they're effective. And it really depends on who you're communicating with and how many of them there are and where they are. So what we're planning to do, we've got a couple of things. We're going to hang on the line here for anyone that wants, and we're going to talk about any specific situations, and certainly happy to, while we're on the phone, build criteria for any specific event. And we will, in the next couple of days, share the community building checklist with you. Gosh, I even have the wrong. This is actually from our last webinar. We're going to have the criteria development worksheet for you. So scratch community building checklist, add the criteria development worksheet. And we'll actually provide a recording of this webinar. So if there's anyone that you hope that would see this information, you're more than glad. We're more than glad to have you share it. or if you want to rewatch it or any of that kind of fun stuff, it'll be yours for the viewing. For those that don't know what we do, just so you have a little bit of sense of it, we have two tools. One is called Score My Pitch, and the other is called Test My Pitch. And actually, Score My Pitch really relates well to our topic today. It's a pitch event judging and feedback system. The whole idea of it, and probably our observation from going to so many pitch events, is that organizers do a great job of getting really smart people in the room, from investors to seasoned entrepreneurs to mentors and so on. And the challenge is when the event's over, more often than not, all that wisdom gets up and it leaves the room. And the whole idea of Score My Pitch is to capture that wisdom, both from judges and from the audience, and convert that potential energy into realized energy in the form of helping the ventures make decisions and move successfully forward. And also the tool is built in a way that it makes the scores and the results much more reliable, both for whatever the organization's intents are, but also for the ventures in terms of what actions they need to take. Our other tool, Test My Pitch, is actually very analogous to Toastmasters Online, or a version, what Toastmasters would be like if it were online. So we create private communities where could be students, could be entrepreneurs, could be staff or professionals can improve their communication skills. So these private communities might be down to an individual classroom and a professor, to a cohort in an incubator and accelerator, to any type of economic development or division or department level organization, and where individuals are in a safe environment developing, sort of scripting, delivering, and getting feedback on different communication goals. So it could be an idea pitch, it could be an investment pitch, it could be a sales pitch, any of that, and they're getting both help on the scripting side through a templated process, and also congruent feedback as the feedback is all given in a templated process as well. So irrespective of who gives them feedback, it's all aligned with the program outcomes. So those are our tools, and certainly happy to chat with anybody after or at any point if you have questions or would like to learn more. So for those that really just wanted the webinar, we're so glad that you joined us, and we're more than excited to help you in any way that we can. And if you have questions later, please let us know, or would like a tour of our services. We'd certainly be happy to do that, and we'd love to learn more about what you're doing. For those that would like to hang out for the office hours, well, we've arrived at those.